Hi, so today this is the Data Quality Foundation for Digital Transformation presentation. My name is Scott Arnett. I'm a Senior Director, Product Management at Pitney Bowes Software Division. Few just housekeeping things maybe up front, and hopefully I'll remember some of this at the end as well. There is an app that they've told me about where you can give your feedback on those sessions. If you've downloaded already and would like to provide your feedback at the end of the session, it would be very much appreciated. If you haven't, please go up to the website and download and share your thoughts there. And hopefully after the session is over. The other thing is, if you have any questions, this is a relatively small audience, so if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them at any time. Just raise your hand. This is a small group. I'm a pretty casual guy, so if you have any thoughts or things that make this a valuable presentation for you, or things that you want to discuss, please let me know. And also, so you know that we have cameras around the room, and everybody who's in the back half of the room is going to be part of the YouTube video that gets put up on the internet later. So if you want to move forward, that's fine. So anyways, my name is Scott Arnett. I work for Pitney Bowes. How many people here have heard of Pitney Bowes? This is always a fun question for me. All right, yeah, so about right. So we're, for those of you who don't know us, we're a 120-year-old company. Started out mainly in mailing communications. We've branched out into digital services. We've now built out a fairly substantial portfolio in the areas of e-commerce, data management, and other areas as well. So we're a growing business. I personally manage products in our data management space. So the product, and I'll do my one plug for the company at this point. I work for, the product I work on is called Spectrum Customer Information Management Platform. We mainly focus on areas of customer data quality, data management, data enrichment, analytics, MDM, et cetera. So we kind of follow the data journey of your customer data all the way from input into the systems to creating that single customer view, if you will, of your data for both corporations as well as local and federal government agencies. And with me here today is I have Cordelia Min from our Franchise Tax Board to share some of her experiences around data quality and how it impacts operations in federal in government. So bear with me for a little bit, and I'll just kind of glide over what I think are kind of the common thoughts around this. So the reason I'm here today, actually, we've started to, with the platform and the products that I work with, we've started to see a lot more movement, if you will, a lot more investment in this area of digital transformation, and particularly, whether that be in government or corporations or et cetera. And a lot of it, of course, is having to do with the fact that more and more of the citizens, consumers in the world are moving to digital platforms and how they interact with organizations. And organizations, from a competitive standpoint in the corporate world, or even from a government standpoint in terms of optimizing interactions with clients and being able to provide better services, are looking at these digital channels as a way to provide a contextually relevant service for the consumer, as well as a omni-channel experience. In other words, being able to work with your citizen consumer, if you will, across multiple channels of input, and allowing the consumer to really pick how they want to interact with you, as opposed to the old-fashioned method, which is, I'm going to send you a mailing bill and you have to mail this thing back to me, and that's how we're going to interact. And so in this day and age, more and more people are kind of leaning towards wanting to be able to work with organizations in the way that they choose. And I think a lot of this you guys are probably familiar with, but like I said, just as basis for our conversation. It's predicted by a lot of the analysts that by 2020, 85% of customer and citizen interactions with different organizations are going to be driven without the direct interaction with a person. So in other words, through websites, through mobile applications, et cetera. And we're seeing that in terms of adoption of these technologies. So when we look at some of our corporate consumers and the CIOs that we interview at many of the bigger corporations, about 84% of them are really focused on customer interaction from a digital standpoint, as opposed to how do I interact with a client when they're in my store, how do I interact with a client through the mail or other channels. Web, email, social media tend to dominate the ways that they want to interact with their customers. And as we've started to work with local government agencies on this topic of digital transformation, we're seeing a similar kind of thing. And I have an example, I'll go through that here at the end of my portion of the presentation about one government agency in particular that we had some success with in terms of helping them go digital with their citizen base. Now, one of the things that does make this a bit challenging, actually there's a few things that make this very challenging, is the fact that there is no one single channel of communication that necessarily defines your entire citizen base. You have a variety of age groups, a variety of demographics that you work with inside of your user base. And really, it's kind of dependent on how old they are, what age group they fall into is what their practices are. So like my parents, who fall into the silent generation group at the bottom, for them, telephone, direct interaction is really the way that they like to go. Although I will admit, my parents have become fairly tech savvy in the last few years, mostly out of necessity. But really, they're most comfortable with working with people over the phone. Baby boomers kind of the same, although they've kind of gotten into the electronic messaging, which for me as a Generation X person has really kind of become my primary, the web, email, etc. And then I got the younger, more annoying types who are below me, who like the social media and the constant interaction with Twitter and Facebook and other places like that. So this is, what you'll find is that as you go digital, there's not really one direction that's going to knock it out of the park for every one of your groups. And that presents in and of itself some kind of natural challenges with regards to where do I invest for my digital transformation and how do I support that? Now I was looking for quotes. I thought this one was really good. So this is from Mike Bracken, who was being interviewed by, I think it was Deloitte, for a piece that they did. About was a former chief data officer, chief digital officer within the UK government. And the piece in this whole quote, if you want to read it, but there's a piece in here that I was most interested in is his comment about digital service design means designing the whole service and not just the digital bits. And I'll give you maybe a little bit of a personal experience on this one. So a few years ago, Pitney went through a similar kind of transformation and had the idea of across all of our different businesses, we wanted to have that single view, single service piece. And we've launched and I think have been very successful at getting to that point, but it was a many-year process. And at the very beginning of the journey, we kind of had the same realization, which is like, well, having a website where somebody could log in and get their customer service and buy new ink toner for their postage meter or whatever, wasn't really enough. Because what we had in reality, when you stop and look at it, was many different customers who worked with many different parts of the organization, and each part of the organization had their own view of who that client was. And until we could get to a point where everything was in one place, I couldn't really give you a full range of services that made us look like one company. One login to one site to do everything I need for Pitney Bowes. So this is, to me, and when we talk to clients who are going down this route, a lot of the ones who bring us in and engage us either directly or through our partners, this is the problem that they're trying to solve, which is how do I prep my data for this role in digital transformation? Now, given my role, my take in this presentation is going to be mostly focused on the data aspects, right? So there's all kinds of people you can talk to about what's the best way to message out to different areas, and we even have some people within PB that can help with that. But my focus primarily is, in order for you to be successful, and getting back to this quote a little bit, you really have to design the digital service all the way back through the systems and processes and people that are going to be behind the scenes of that digital piece. And a lot of that's going to focus on making sure that the data that you're using is prepped and ready for this. So In particular, and the one that we spend the most time on is citizen/consumer data, right? There's obviously all kinds of data that can go into this, your services data, your fulfillment data, your customer service data, and all those pieces. Those tend to be not as complex, and the main reason is because within your organization, there's usually a specific part of the org that deals with that aspect of your data, and the data doesn't get much use outside of that organization. It might get reported upwards, but you don't have your sales team really digging into and trying to utilize your fulfillment, for example, or your financial data. But customer/citizen data is used by everybody. And it presents a series of particular challenges because of this, because everybody has a different perspective on what's important about the citizen and customer. So everybody's appending their own detail to it. They may not be doing so in one centralized location. They may be making copies of this, and most likely, and most organizations are making copies of this data in various places, data warehouses, other operational systems, et cetera, appending their own information, and in effect, coming up with their own truth. And as you go digital and you start looking at the challenges of pulling all of this together, the linchpin or the pivot point becomes that customer data, and getting a unified view of that is what is one of the bigger challenges. And so I've kind of gotten a little bit ahead of myself, but the utilization becomes a big part of why this data is unique. And it's also usually the area where a data quality problem will really start to crop up first, right? Particularly as you start to run analytics, right? So now, as you get into the digital world, one of the big aspects of digital is that I want to be able to present my consumer, my citizen, with contextually relevant services, right? And that could take the part of either predicting a behavior, i.e., why are they at my website? Why are they trying to communicate with me over this thing? What the next action to take might be in order to please or better get a better service engagement there, or even just to figure out where to invest and how to optimize my interactions with the consumer. And all of that's going to really depend on how good is your data about the customer, and data quality starts to really show up in some of those areas. And as I mentioned, this is it has a tendency to permeate throughout your organization. You may have a set of standardized entry points where customers register their information and it gets into your organization. But many corporations and other organizations find that it starts to kind of populate out from there. As different use cases for the data come to be, usually a different copy of the data is used, just for efficiency and for expediency's sake. So when you get back to this point of trying to digitize your experience, like I said, this becomes a big issue. And it can lead to another number of big data quality related impact items through the organization, right? Your inability to get a unified view can impact the efficiency of your digital transformation initiatives. You'll spend a lot of money investing in websites, investing in those personalized communications that won't give you the return that you really want if you don't have that clear view of who your customer is, what their needs are, what services they're getting from you. If your foray, if you will, into this area results in frustration on their part, they can be very fickle about whether or not they will continue to come back to it. Now, I'll use an example here, from not necessarily from the government world, but from mostly where it's impacted in the consumer world, but it's somewhat topical. How many people here are familiar with with GDPR or know what that is? It's not surprising. This is mainly so in the European Union right now, there is a set of regulations called the Consumer General Data Consumer Protection. It's basically regulations. I should get my acronym straight, but it's basically regulations in place in order to guarantee the rights and protection of consumer data that's held by corporations that do business with European customers. Now, why is that relevant here? As an example, as we've begun to engage with customers in Europe over this very topic, and these are regulations that are going to hit sometime next year, one of the biggest challenges that they are having is how do I figure out where all my customer data is? So one of the parts of this regulation says that a consumer can opt out of you holding their information, right? You have to provide a consumer the ability to come to your business and say, I don't want you holding my personal information anymore. I no longer do business with you, therefore I don't want you containing my information so that it might be vulnerable to being stolen or misappropriately used. Well, there are hefty fines in place to not compliance with that. The regulations are very strict about how quickly and you have to be able to react to that, but your ability to react is based upon how well do I understand where my customer data actually is. And that's driving, just like the digital transformation world would be driving for your organizations, this need for a centralized view, those kind of regulatory processes are also driving companies in the same kind of direction. And all of them, I mean, whether you're talking about big companies, middle companies, government organizations, et cetera, they're all suffering the same problem. How do I know where this data is, what kind of shape is it in, and how do I build processes on top of that data? Now, there are a number of problems that crop up in terms of managing data quality and what people think of as being their data quality problem. The biggest one that we see is basically errors that are made at the entry point. So whether this is a customer service rep who's entering in information during a phone call, a self-service website where I'm typing in my information, we find that catching and fixing the data quality problem at the point of entry is probably the most effective and most cost-effective way to deal with problem. But you can't rely on it by itself because, like they say about wine, it ages over time, and the problems, even if they're fixed once, that data tends to mutate, if you will, over time, and you need a continual process, really, in order to continually make sure that the quality is good. The other impact area are in areas of operations, right? The people who actually have to do something with this data, whether it's fulfill a service or deal with a customer on the phone, oftentimes they spend an inordinate amount of time trying to fix the data problem and correct it in the system as opposed to actually dealing with the issue at hand. And that's a cost issue, right? If I can make my customer service, my service reps, my delivery people more effective, spend less time on the data problem and more time on the actual service, that's going to result in a better outcome for everybody. And then, other things to kind of keep in mind is that when you start looking at things like reporting, trying to track ROI on processes, et cetera, all of those can be impacted by the quality of the data. So at this point, does everybody understand the data quality problem is kind of served? Oops, next one. Excuse me. Now, what does it mean when I have actually fixed this problem? If I actually have gone through the process of establishing a good data quality practice and a good governance process, what does that mean for my organization? And there's a number of things that you can get out of this, right? It makes easier, there's a lot of organizations that will talk about measuring the value of the data, trying to assign a actual value to the data that you manage. And this is, usually measured in terms of efficiencies across the organization. It's measured in terms of potential opportunities with these, with the end users. And that kind of an ROI tracking can be very important to a successful data quality process, but it obviously is easier to measure if you have very good tracking of who your customers and citizens are. Increased satisfaction, as I mentioned before, getting this wrong can result in a bad experience in the first contact that this citizen has with your systems. And oftentimes, that's enough to prevent them from going back and using it again. So if you want to make a hit with your digital transformations, if you want to make sure that you are, quote unquote, delighting your citizen or customer and making sure and encouraging them to come back through these channels, you really don't want to have that first experience not be a positive one. Oops. An ability to form an analysis and a clear set of objectives, increase confidence across the business, and actually I'll talk a little bit about that in the example that I have in here in just a little bit. an ability to focus resources and get that operational efficiency out of the system, and other areas as well. So things like increasing credibility and trust amongst different staff. You know, there's the constant question that we run into all the time of, well, you know, I see that the report says that this is the outcome, but what was your data source, right? And there's always this back and forth questioning. A centralized view of this consumer or the citizen will allow you to have a much more trusted source for the data that everyone can kind of agree on. And eliminate a lot of the conflicting reports that basically tell you two different things based on who generated the report in the first time. It adds value to the organization, and it gives you an opportunity to better understand the citizen and find new ways to serve them in a way that brings value both to your organization and also improves satisfaction with them overall. So how do you drive that? So what is the way? So you're understanding now. So there's a bad side to not having it. There's a good side to having it. What exactly is the starting point for this? And really, it comes down to a data management strategy. Somebody in the organization really has to kind of own this process, right? Somebody has to really kind of take it to heart and be the evangelist for the organization, both in terms of what processes are needed, what issues are going to be addressed first in what priority order, and monitoring this ongoing so that they can continually drive and improve. This is not a fix it once and you're done process. This is a continual improvement area, and it's usually done by investing in those areas that have the highest impact first and then working your way down the priority chain.